Hi everybody, welcome again to the Farm and Country Podcast. This is episode 17. Today is Friday, and I've got two awesome topics to talk about today. As usual, we are going to talk about a money-making business idea, and then I'm going to talk about an article that I read that just floored me. So, get ready for that. Today's episode is brought to you by the Farm and Country Store. You can find our store online at farmandcountry.store, S-T-O-R-E, not .com. I picked a .store because it's a store. So we're having a special in the month of May. Any listener of the Farm and Country podcast can get 15% off only for May. Okay, so it's the 26th today. You've got like 5 more days to get 15% off any order. Free shipping on everything in the store. Farmandcountry.store, guys. Pick up your garden stuff. Pick up your homestead stuff. We got tools in there. It's all there. So, today I thought I'd start with the Friday business idea because, why not, right? It's getting to the end of May, and you're probably thinking about, most of you've probably got your gardens in. You know, you're seeing your animals probably giving birth. You know, you're repairing things around your homestead. You're starting to see leaves on the trees. Okay, so if you live anywhere south of us, you've probably had leaves on your trees for a long time. But we just got, here in Alberta, we just got finished with a enormous windstorm, and it was brutal. It was absolutely brutal. It was 2.5, I think 3 days of just steady, like 50-mile-an-hour winds, just pummeling everything. And we escaped without too much damage. We lost, how many shingles? Probably 80 shingles off the roof, but I've replaced shingles off the roof every year since we moved in, so that's not really new. Also, my gutters, my rain gutters, peeled off and flipped up on top of the roof, which is weird. I did not expect that to happen, and there's nothing I could have done to prevent that. I do have a trampoline out here, and it survived because I knew that this windstorm was coming, so I basically I put as many heavy things under the trampoline as I could, and I anchored it to the ground with bin anchors. If you know what a bin anchor is, it's basically an auger that spins into the ground, and a giant steel cable attaches to the whatever you're trying to hold down. And they're designed to hold down grain bins, you know, those giant things that people store grain in. So it worked well for a trampoline. I'm so glad the windstorm is over. It's just something that happens here in, well, I mean, I guess in the prairies. I imagine that people in the U.S., you probably experienced a lot of this windstorm. It wasn't confined to Canada, but it did cover 3 provinces in its, major epicenter. And apparently, it was as bad as a Category 1 hurricane. So, I mean, that's pretty bad. I've never experienced a hurricane. So if you have and you're like, that's peanuts there, Adam. A real hurricane actually blows houses apart. You know what? Okay, I get you. It didn't cause much damage here, but it was pretty bad. The city got it much worse. The city of Calgary got probably millions of dollars in damage, so that was pretty tragic. But anyway, things are going really well out here on the farm. It's been a bit of a crazy week, but we are getting about 30 to 40 people listening to the show every episode, which is exciting because I haven't hardly done anything to promote the show, and I wasn't sure how things would just progress. I've been so busy with other things. I'm writing a book, I'm running 2 online stores, and I'm working full-time, plus managing 24 sheep and a whole bunch of repair projects now that need to be done. So as you can imagine, my time is extremely tight. I have to manage everything I do with just really high precision. And I haven't had a lot of chance to promote the show, but hopefully you guys are getting something out of this. And if you are, please send me an email. I'm desperate to hear from somebody out there who is benefiting from this, or if you have ideas for this. Everybody's just been really quiet, and I feel like I've got 30 or 40 ninjas listening to the show. So if you're one of those ninjas, reveal yourself, pop up out of the out of the grass and scare me. Send me an email, even to just say, hey, your show is okay. You look like a potato. Thanks. Bye. It would be awesome. Even if it's criticism, I'll take it. So anyway, let's get into this business idea. So I am pledged every Friday to bring you one money-making idea, something that you can take and turn into dollars in your pocket, guys. And there's so many things out there that I don't think I'll ever run out of ideas. And they're all, the criteria in my mind is it has to be something that rural people can execute. This isn't an idea that you can execute in the city, although if you live next to a city, there are things you can do while still living in the country that are excellent businesses, and we'll get into those too later. But today I thought I would talk about building fences as a business and how you could get started doing that, and how you can set yourself apart as an expert in fence building, even if you've never built a fence in your life before. Of course, it would help if you have built a few fences, because obviously, having a track record of success is important in terms of getting your customers, on track. But after this giant windstorm, I realized that, I would happily, if I had some cash in my pocket right now, I would pay somebody to build a fence that could block the kind of wind I saw over the last 2.5, 3 days. And you know what? This wasn't an isolated windstorm. Out here where I'm at, on the prairies, and I'm sure you guys in Montana and North Dakota, probably Colorado, and all the way down that, prairie belt region, you guys probably get the same kind of crazy wind every now and then that we do. And it just drives you nuts. I mean, everything blows around. Shingles fly off the roof, barns, doors get torn off, gates get ripped off. I mean, it's just raging wind. But there's a product out there that's a giant wind fence, and it's actually a pretty genius idea. It's not a solid fence. It's like a black mesh, and it just slows the wind down. It doesn't stop the wind. It slows it down significantly. And it's not just for windy areas, guys. This would be excellent for anybody trying to plant fruit trees, anybody trying to start a garden, anybody looking at doing anything with plants. If you're living in a windy area, the wind just kills your garden and your plants and everything like that. So having the ability to block that wind would be a huge benefit to gardeners. So let's start with the basics of starting a business, solving a problem. So a lot of people will just advertise themselves out there and say, hey, I build fences, and if you want your fence built, come and find me. See, guys, that's not the way to go about starting a business. The way to start a business is to find somebody who is experiencing pain and tell them that you can solve their problem for them. You got to find a pain point in your customers and say, listen, my product will solve your problems. You need this. People who are thinking about building a fence are only thinking about building a fence. They have no idea whether they need a fence or not. They know, maybe you've got customers out there who are, chicken farmers, and they're like, well, I'd like a fence to keep my chickens in. The pain point for chicken farmers, and I'm going to use this term pain point because it's a pretty common word in business marketing. The pain point is the problem that needs to be solved in your customer's life. the insurmountable obstacle that needs to be corrected. And you've got to find that pain point. So for chicken farmers, it's predators. And I'm part of a homesteading forum on Facebook, and I see all the time people talking about, something snuck into my chicken coop and killed 20 chickens. And I mean, that's a major problem if you're trying to keep chickens, because any predator, chickens are basically like completely defenseless. They have no defenses against any kind of predators. They can't fly. They're fat. They're tasty, but they are basically like giant balls of walking meat. And so they need to be protected against predators. Now you, being the business and entrepreneurial type, you can say to yourself, well, I know a couple of ways to build a fence because I went on Pinterest and I looked and I saw a really cool idea for building a chicken fence. And look, I built my own here on my own homestead. So I now know how to do it, right? So the only thing that you need to know is how to do it. And you only really need to do it one time. You need to sort of at least figure out how to do it and how to make it look good. And you can use your fence as your sample product. So if you've gone out there and you've built a barbed wire fence or a page wire fence, page wire is the wire mesh thing, or a field fence, or you've done split rail fence. Guys, there are as many types of fencing as there is, people to build them. There is an unlimited number of fences out there. And, fencing on a homestead is a vital part of, keeping things in and keeping predators out. And even just separating your house from the rest of your homestead. It just looks nice. So, fencing and creating barriers is a huge untapped business, and I don't see enough people advertising their fencing business. Once in a while I'll come across somebody who's, they're building a barbed wire fence. Out here, barbed wire fences are big, and there will be guys going out and building, miles of barbed wire fence, and they specialize in that, and they're good at it. You know what? You need to become one of those guys, because the prices I see these guys charging, they're making good money off of this. But don't restrict yourself to just barbed wire fences. You got to cover a big spectrum, and that way you'll have more people that see you as being an expert. So here's a couple of fencing ideas that you could do. That you could do 6-foot treated wood fencing in city lots or small acreage lots. Acreage people especially need fences. It's just, they've got, sometimes they don't have trees or anything like that, and especially when you live out on the prairies and your house is sitting in the middle of the bald arse prairie, you just need something around your house to make you feel like you're safe. And I don't really know how to explain it, but you'll know what I mean when you see, a house with a really nice fence around it. It just looks cozy, it looks tidy, it looks safe, and it looks comfortable. So you can do that. Now here's a couple of the tools that you might need for building fences. You'll need a post hole auger. You don't really need a big fancy one. Just a handheld one would probably do for starters, but you might want to look into getting a nicer one, once you get a few customers, because they have toe-behind augers that are really handy. And I had a buddy who is now living in another province, and he had a sideline fencing business, and he was busy. He was busy from basically the time the ground thawed out until the ground froze again, and he would do anything, and he only built one kind of fence, which was kind of funny. He was specialized, and he still had just scads of work, and he was a big burly guy, so him doing fencing was probably not a huge, physical challenge. But he was constantly saying, oh yeah, I had to turn this customer down and this and that, and I'm like, wow, that's a pretty nice problem to have when you got to turn customers down, guys. I've been there. I've had a business where I had to turn customers down because I was just too overwhelmed with work. It's a great problem to have. It means you can raise your prices. You can really be picky about your customers, and you can perfect your brand. You become an in-demand brand, and that's the way to build a business. Oh, so yeah, I was talking about these augers. So these tow-behind augers, they run off a gas engine, of course, but you basically don't have to lift this auger up and like plunge it in the ground. It's got a counterweight, and my buddy, he brought this auger by, and he drilled a few holes for me, and this thing was like blazing fast. It was just boom, 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 and I can see where, the speed really makes things efficient. Yeah, it was just a cool product, and I think he said he paid like, I don't know, maybe $1,200 for this auger, and if you're going to start a business doing something like this, you're going to have to invest some money in it. It's not going to be a lot of money, but you do need some tools, and you need probably a truck to tow them, and if you're doing fencing, you're definitely going to need a truck to put fencing boards in. You're not going to carry them in the back of a car. So it's not a free business to start, guys, but you know what? The barriers to entry are still pretty low. I mean, if you're living on a homestead, chances are you've definitely got a truck somewhere. And if you've got a truck, then you've got half of what you need. So, what's another type of fence here? This wind fence thing I was talking about, I'm just looking at it right now. It's called the Chinook Win Fence. And it basically consists of some really tall metal poles that are basically sunk. It looks like they're sunk pretty deep into the ground. And it suspends this black mesh in between the poles. And they look like they're about 10 or 12 feet apart. And it's really tall. And it's not the prettiest looking fence. I will admit that. It doesn't look nice and rustic like a wooden fence. But you can actually make a wooden wind fence. And, of course, you need to really build it strong. But you can do that with a post pounder and some really heavy-duty, 2x6 rough-cut fencing that you can buy at a farm store. And it's more expensive than regular fence boards, but they're heavy-duty. They're the kind that you would build a corral out of. I have some out on my sheep pen, and these boards weigh they're 16 feet long, and they probably weigh about 80 to 150 pounds each. So they're extremely heavy, but they're really sturdy and they're thick. And so you can drive a nail in these things and it'll hold. And so I'm building a wind fence out of these big, huge, I guess you call them 2x6s, but it's more of a 3.5x6 because it's really, really thick. Much thicker than a 2x6. So building a wind fence, of course, you wouldn't want to put the boards right up against each other because the wind does need to... You're not trying to block the wind, you're trying to slow it down. And that's the key, guys. You're not trying to block the wind if you're building a wind fence, you're just trying to slow it down. And so you've got to space your boards about an inch apart. And that'll do it. Now, of course, one of the keys to building a wind fence is that the posts in the ground have to be absolutely rock solid. So there's two ways to do this. You can either get very tall, regular treated fence posts and just hammer them in with a post pounder, which is what I've done with my sheep fence. Or you can get really fancy 4x4 treated posts, dig a hole that's quite deep. You need to go down about 3 feet. And then you just cement that post in place. And when you're cementing a post in place, of course, you need concrete, and you need to get the hole deep enough and wide enough to accommodate a fairly large amount of concrete. But that kind of fence would last a very long time. And it would look good, too, if you built it right. I have a fence that I built like that. It doesn't look great because I didn't really know what I was doing. But with a little bit of practice, and if you build your own fence, you'll quickly learn the techniques to make your fence sturdy and strong, and look good. And you know how you do that, guys? You just look at what other people have done and you copy it. Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, right? So just copy what other successful people are doing. Get a little bit good at it, and then put yourself out there. And obviously, if you're trying to attract customers, you can price yourself really competitively. Charge less. Get a bunch of customers and just spend an entire summer working. And you're maybe not going to make as much money in your first summer, but you'll get really good at it. And when you get really good at it, you can start raising your prices because you're really good at it. Plus, now you've got a bunch of people who know your work and will pass along your name if someone else says, hey, I'm looking for somebody who knows how to build a fence. Can you recommend anybody? And sure enough, your name will come up. And guys, I guarantee you, if you persist, you will get to the point where you will turn down work. It's just inevitable. So that's the business idea of the day, guys, and I'm going to leave that there for you to do with what you want. Now, I'm gonna rant about something here, and this is definitely related to agriculture, and this comes from an article in the Washington Post. I'll post a link to the article in the show notes, and it's titled, Venezuela's Paradox. People are hungry, but farmers can't feed them. And this article was posted, what's the posting date? It's not up here. Okay, May 22nd, so it's very recent. This has actually been going on in Venezuela for a long time. I'll just give you the history on this. Venezuela is a country in South America, and I believe they speak Spanish in Venezuela, if I'm not mistaken. There's only two major languages in South America. There's Portuguese and Spanish. And Brazil is Portuguese, being the biggest country. Argentina is Spanish, but I don't know about the other countries. I don't know what they speak. But this article focuses on a farmer whose name is Saulo Escobar. So it does sound Spanish, doesn't sound Portuguese to me. But, I mean, you can imagine in South America has wonderful climate. I mean, it must be a great place to grow food. They grow coffee there. They grow everything. Everything that you buy comes from South America. Coffee, bananas, heroin. We mean not heroin. Cocaine. Cocaine comes from South America. It's one of the major exports. But Venezuela is experiencing something that we call a currency devaluation, and that's because the government of Venezuela is criminal. And this poor farmer is he's trying his best to produce food. And the funny thing about Venezuela is back in the 70s, it used to be one of the highest food producing and one of the most prosperous nations in South America. And now it's barely better than a third world nation. In fact, I mean, I think it would probably qualify as being a third world nation. There are literally people starving to death. If there isn't anything third world about that, then I don't know what is. So I'll start off here. In Yuma, Venezuela, it says, with cash running low and debts piling up, Venezuela's socialist government has cut back sharply on food imports. Food imports, guys. Venezuela basically doesn't get winter, and they're still importing food. Goes on to say, and for farmers in most countries, that would present an opportunity. But this is Venezuela, whose economy operates on its own special plane of dysfunction. At a time of empty supermarkets and spreading hunger, the country's farms are producing less and less, not more, making the calorie deficit even worse. Drive around the countryside outside the capital, Caracas, and there's everything a farmer needs. Fertile land, water, sunshine, and gasoline at 4 cents a gallon. The cheapest in the world. 4 cents a gallon, guys. How do you go wrong with that? Yet somehow families here are just as scrawny looking as the city-dwelling Venezuelans waiting in bread lines or picking through garbage cans for scraps. So I'll skip to the little bit of an interview with Saulo Escobar, who runs a poultry and hog farm an hour outside of Caracas. He said, last year I had 200,000 hens to lay eggs. He says, now I have 70,000. Several of his large hen houses sit empty because Escobar says he can't afford to buy any more chicks or feed. Government price controls have made his business unprofitable, and armed gangs are extorting him for payments and stealing his eggs. So I'll just pause there and I'll talk about a couple of these issues here. So basically, Venezuela is experiencing a major devaluation in its currency. The currency is called the bolivar, and it's being devalued, meaning that nobody will accept your bolivar in exchange for food. So when you're running a business like this chicken guy here, this guy has got he had 200,000 hens, and he's trying to feed them, but he can't buy any feed because the government's devaluing the currency. And so every time he sells a product and tries to go and buy the things he needs to make more products, that is the feed, the prices have gone up. And so he's basically operating at a loss. And you can see that he's losing hens. He's having to sell his hens or reduce his numbers just to basically survive. I mean, this guy's going to be out of business in a year. I mean, at this rate, I'm amazed that he's still in business. I would have just said, you know what, screw this, I'm out. So it goes on to talk about, where is it here? He's talking about an armed gang. Apparently every week or so, somebody pulls up on a motorcycle to rob the guy. He says since one of his delivery trucks was robbed in December, he's been forced to make protection payments to a mafia boss operating out of the local prison. So you can see that, the authorities are basically in cahoots with these guys, allowing them to operate these criminal gangs in prison. So every Friday, 3 motorcycles would stop by the farm to pick up an envelope of cash. And calling the police would only escalate the danger. I know how to deal with chickens and pigs, Escobar says, but not criminals. And I want to tell you guys that there's 2 groups of criminals that poor Escobar is dealing with. Now, obviously, the criminal gang that comes and steals his cash every Friday, those are criminals, but they're just run-of-the-mill criminals. They're garden variety criminals. You can find those criminals everywhere. We have criminals like that here in Canada. Not so blatant and in your face, but there is a huge increase in the amount of people coming and stealing trucks and trailers and quads and all kinds of valuable things out of people's farmyard house and stuff like that. And that's just ordinary criminality. And you're going to find that no matter where you go, even in the richest countries, there's just criminals. And so you've just got to plan ahead for that kind of criminal behavior. So, I mean, keep your stuff secure, keep it locked up. But those criminals are nothing compared to the real professional criminals of the government. And poor Saulo has no idea that these criminals, that the real criminals are stealing from him at a much greater rate than he can possibly imagine. And you know what? The funny thing is that when things get bad in these kinds of countries, or even in here in North America, in Western countries where things are good right now, when problems develop in agriculture, guess who we turn to solve them? We turn to the government. But the government is terrible at solving problems. In fact, most of, if not all of the problems that poor Saulo Escobar is experiencing are a direct result of government interference in the marketplace. So obviously, Venezuela is a very extreme example of socialism where it's just been chronic for decades, and it's, the government has had several currency basically failures, and they're probably heading for another hyperinflation where the currency collapses and everybody's money becomes just absolutely worthless. But even small interventions in countries like Canada and the United States are not good for the industry. So here in Canada we have government regulations around agriculture, and there's this huge battle now against the new government. The farmers in Alberta absolutely despise the current provincial government, who is called the National Democratic Party, or New Democratic Party, NDP, anyway. So it's almost that the word NDP is basically a swear word. You might as well go and, say, Heil Hitler or something to talk about the NDP, in a cafe in a small town. That's about how popular they are here in rural Alberta. Of course, people in the big cities voted for the NDP. I don't care for the NDP, but I'm not ragingly militant against them. I just don't prefer them. Every government has its problems, and the NDP has its share. The government before had its share of problems, so I'm not saying that, the next government's going to be perfect, even if it's the one that I vote for. But it would probably be better. So anyway, we've got regulations here in Alberta, and they restrict people who want to produce food, and it's called supply management. Supply management is one of those things that's a great idea when you think about it, but it's absolute garbage when it actually hits the marketplace. So I'm not going to talk a lot about supply management, but I want you to pray for the people in Venezuela. As I was thinking about this article, I kept saying in my mind Argentina. I'm sure Argentina has its problems too, but Venezuela is the place where people are starving and hungry. And I'm just so angry at the government in Venezuela that they can't just get out of the way and let people produce food without trying to mess with everything. And they've nationalized, production, and they're trying to control everything. And that's terrible. And ultimately, I see that every government's goal is to control everything, because they truly believe that if government wasn't there to control things, that people would basically die. But the fact is that people are perfectly capable of managing their own businesses without government interference. Customers are perfectly capable of seeing bad business practices and saying, you know what, I'm not going to buy from that business. I'm going to let them, go out of business the old-fashioned way by going bankrupt, and let those businesses die the natural death instead of government coming in and trying to kill business with regulation. And, we can argue about which regulations are good and bad, but ultimately, I don't think that any real regulation is a replacement for what the marketplace can do. We need rules in the marketplace, but it's far easier and better to let the marketplace decide what those rules are, and let the customers punish companies that don't follow those rules. So if a company produces a bad car, they get sued and go bankrupt, and then other companies look at that and say, holy crap, I don't want to go bankrupt, and they start making better cars. And it works great when it's allowed to work. But as you can see in Venezuela, it's not being allowed to work. And so people are basically starving to death. And the article talks about the fact a survey of 6,500 Venezuelan families, 3/4 of adults said they lost weight in 2016, an average of 19 pounds. And this collective emaciation is referred to as the Maduro diet. But guys, it's starvation. That's not a good way to lose weight when you can't get enough food. So that's not great. So anyway, guys, that was it for Friday episode. Hopefully you got something out of that. I know I did. I read that article and I learned a lot about the kind of policies that destroy business. And I had to stop and say a little prayer for the people in Venezuela, because it just kind of broke my heart to hear about people trying so hard and just being crushed at every corner. And remember that, guys, the next time you're in the voting booth and you're looking at, which government ruler do I want over me, the guy who doesn't want to do anything is probably the best bet. You want the guy who sits in his office in the government building and just plays solitaire. That would be the perfect politician. The guy who doesn't do anything and votes no on every law. That would be my perfect politician. So, hey guys, if you like this kind of thing, we've got an episode every Monday and Friday. I've kind of cut out the Wednesday show because it's just crazy right now. But I want to bring you fantastic content. And so, Monday and Friday. So that's it. Check us out, farmandcountrypodcast.com. And with that, good night.